Now, for today's discussion, we will be tackling the challenges of governance in Africa, looking into democracy, civil wars, leaderships and corruption. And now joining us in studio is Dr. Charles Sinkala, a lawyer and renowned political scientist and business entrepreneur, who is also an international political expert and president of World Native Identity Foundation. A very warm welcome to you, sir, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Now, Dr. Sinkala, the African continent is faced with different challenges every day, but we are struggling to apply African solutions into these problems that we're faced with. What measures do we need to put in place when it comes to these challenges?
Yeah, thank you very much. You know, actually, first we must look at the problems, the real challenges which Africa is facing. It's the political electoral reforms which hasn't been covered. We do not have a universal electoral reforms, the whole African continent, which can be applied freely for people to participate in electoral college and vote for leaders whom they choose. And after elections that everybody celebrates, we always have challenges and problems, like in Zimbabwe had recent elections. The opposition can't accept the results. There was a tension of rigging and all those type of things. We're having problems as well in Mali. They were voting over the weekend. The opposition have also indicated that they were never going to accept the outcome of the results. We are also planning to have some elections in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where we believe part of the opposition leaders were blocked not to get nominated. Moses Katumbi from DRC, one of the opposition leaders, is trying to find his way. I mean, I was stuck, I think, in Zambia for quite some time to find his way to Democratic Republic of Congo. But I like the sense of the Democratic Republic of Congo opposition leaders who said we're not going to go into the elections without having another opposition leader here, Moses Katumbi, whom I believe they're going to inclusively allow to stand. So the destabilizing of the electoral reforms is a challenge in Africa. In addition to that, we've got corruption. You know, the corruption is on the industrial scale in Africa, that it promotes the underdevelopment of African continent and the countries individually, because leaders are voted into power and they take that advantage of only achieving that objective of re-elections and buying votes so that they can be voted, forgetting the plight that they have to help the development of the country. I'll give an example. We've got these challenges in Zambia, in Malawi, DRC, Mali, Central African Republic of Congo, where there's some funds which they are called CDF, the Constituency Development Funds. These funds are deposited direct into members of parliament account, personal account. Now, you look at that situation where this member of parliament has got maybe problems, his debit orders never went through and all those type of things, and he receives these public funds. So these are some of the biggest challenges which we have in Africa, and until when we rewrite and address these challenges, that these are public funds, we differentiate from personal funds, and also cramp on corruption, which has been very not as we expected to be tackled, because crime and punishment has to be a deterrence, you know, for would-be perpetrators. But we find that there's so much leniency across Africa, and none of these political allies or anybody is being held accountable for corruption. So these are some of just the challenges which Africa has to address.
And you also mentioned the challenge that most countries are looking at, which is elections, where we've seen Zimbabwe and Mali have been through elections accompanied by violence and court actions. Has this become a common trend in Africa, and what should we expect next from other countries if we're seeing that when it comes to elections, courts are taking place, violence is also in the center as well?
Yes, Riseko, if I take you back when Africa regained high independence, I think it lost hard tests of performance during 1973, and because of the mushrooming of dictators who started taking over the governance and introducing these very poorly type of political reforms, which people they have adapted and they are going through that, you know. So what is happening now, it's actually getting worse each and every day, because the opposition parties, especially, you know, they are not being given an opportunity, you know, to hear their views or to participate in these electoral reforms. And none of the elections are free. I mean, all the elections has been denied. I mean, we had this problem also in Kenya, where Uhuru Kenyatta, they had to do a rerun. You know, we had the problem also in Zambia in 2016, where the opposition party never accepted the results, and that beef keeps on carrying on, and it affects the development of the country, you know. And I think what Africa needs to do is they must sit down, and the stakeholders, to create a level playing field, which is universal to the rest of the continent. You know, this is practiced in Europe and it works perfectly. I mean, if somebody loses an elections, we don't hear about the constitutional courts or reruns or protests in the streets in Europe. It just goes freely. But why in Africa we can't do it? So until we do not give an opportunity to people to participate freely, free media, and give them an opportunity to accept the defeat, we will have problems like this, and the worst of problems we're going to have. I mean, we had in Zimbabwe, unfortunately, some lives were lost, you know, and it's quite worrying that at the hands of the leaders who are trying to protect the people, you know, they have blood hands, people are dying on their hands. You know, it's time Africa started choosing leaders, you know, who can look after their pride and look at everybody like citizens.
And the EU has observed no fraud in the second round of Mali elections. What does this say about the involvement of the AU in such matters? Can the AU be taken seriously?
No, I don't think so. You know, Africa must stop looking elsewhere. It must stop looking at regional and international involvement. Africa must address their problems alone. You know, EU cannot come and say the elections are free and fair, because the representation on the elections alone, it's below 50%. So that automatically disqualifies a country to go to the election poll, because there's no full representation of the citizens. And besides that, there's also a lot of political parties being incarcerated or being blocked or not being put onto the national television to be given an opportunity to sell their product of the political ideology they are doing. So all these constitutes to free and fair. So if the EU comes and said these elections were free and fair, I doubt their integrity in their involvement. But you see, you cannot blame them because they are outside. You know, even the SADC region, the AU, these are just bodies which formulates policies. You know, it's up to the individual countries to address those policies and implement them. And if they don't implement them, there's nothing EU can do, because all these African states regain their independence, and they have that sovereignty of power, and no any other country can come and tell them what to do. So all these are internal problems in Africa.
And talking about policies, the African Union had declared 2018 as the year of winning the fight against corruption, a sustainable path to Africa's transformation. What efforts should we be seeing taking place now with that theme being put into place? Do you think that, since you've said that, the AU cannot be trusted in most cases with this one? What's your take?
Not really cannot be trusted. I mean, they put very good policies. I've read the Agenda 2063, which is well documented. That was signed by former President Araji Mugabe in 2015. But the lack of the involvement from individual countries in Africa, the 54 countries, they are not willing and partial to come to party, you know, to start implementing. You know, that prophecy of 2018 cramping up corruption is far worse than it was before, because most of the individual countries, some of them had to deregister themselves from the International Criminal Court. They do not want to be subjected to checks and balances. So you can't win a war when you do not have structures and systems in place to combat that corruption, to reduce it. Mind you, corruption is got a principal who is the government. There's an agent there, and there's the receiving end. So the agent binds himself or herself as an agent between the principal, who is the government, and the offender. For instance, somebody commits a traffic offense. There is a cop who is involved there. This cop has got problems with these financial and all those type of things. So you say, no, I'll shovel this behind and the government is not going to know. So this is how corruption, and it goes from there to industrial scale. You talk about contracts in Africa. You'll be so shocked that a road in South Africa is built maybe 700,000 rand per kilometer. In elsewhere, it's almost 2-3 million. You know, the prices are overpriced because the corruption is just too much, because they infiltrate the prices of the projects, because the individuals, the presidents, the institutions gain from that type of transactions. I'll give you an example on some years back. You know, this has been going on for a very long time. The studies by the United Nations in 1991, it accounted that the $200 billion is drained from Africa. It was drained from Africa between 1991 and 2002. You know, by the ruling individuals of the countries who were entrusted to protect those resources. So if you look at the 200 billion, it's quite a lot of money. And at that time in 2002, it was equivalent to squash all the debt of the external debt of the African countries. And it amounted to half of the aid, which is the foreign aid, which is given from elsewhere. You know, so if this leadership and accountability is not set properly into a line to combat this, there's so much wastage. And African leaders that do not sit on the table to engage and find the solution. Africa has been under construction for a very long time. We're still trying to find ways and means, and they point at the EU, point at the SADC, and point at other bodies. We are failing to govern ourselves. You know, we African leaders must sit down and look at these problems. There are only 4 problems: corruption, electoral reforms, and these others to make the citizens happy.
And with that said, can the AU do anything about curbing corruption across the continent?
The AU can only advise. It's an advisory body which stipulates policies on how governments should be run, but they can not go beyond their jurisdiction, you know, to implement those policies in individual countries, you know, because of the sovereignty and because of the Vienna Conference of 1961, which stipulates that countries, they cannot be ruled or dictated rather by any other international bodies there, because they're a sovereign state. You know, that policy was in 1961. Until now it hasn't been changed. So these are the problem. And if now the EU and the others like SADC and regional bodies, they have thought about it, because once they institute or instigate sanctions to individual countries, it's not the leaders who suffer, but the individual people who suffer. For instance, like what happened in Zimbabwe, they've been under sanctions for a very long time until RRG. Maybe some of the sanction has been lifted, but I doubt that. But they must attain that sovereignty of trying to rule the rule of law.
And critics have said that little progress has been made in preventing the illegal movement of money away from the continent and the people who need it the most. Now, people at the grassroots level suffer the most. Is there anything that they could do, or is that entirely up to the AU to handle the corruption situation?
No, I think the young people as well, they must be in individual countries, they must take up to the street to hold their governments accountable, because these laws prevent the money laundering, It's on the larger scale, onto that high level where some of these government, senior government officials are involved. So it's very difficult for them to implement those policies because they are selfishly benefiting from these transactions of tariffs. So EU can advise, like I mentioned earlier, but the individual countries of citizens, I think instead of looking at the gross domestic product, we're supposed to look at the gross domestic happiness of the individual countries. Look at what is happening. We are suffered now in Africa mostly with the striking workers. They are not paid enough or on time. There's also sorts of problems, you know. And Africa has been now a market of imports. We cannot control our import and exports, you know. So these are the challenges. So we have to look at, sit at the table with all these international bodies, respect their ideology, and we start implementing that Agenda 2063. And I think Africa will be going forward. But even saying that there's a lot of problems, there's individual other countries which are doing very well. You know, those who are not want to be included into other countries, but individual mindset of the Africans also is colonized. You know, we need to decolonize the mindset of the people to believe, to start working. When you're in the public office there, you're serving the country, you owe the allegiance for that country. You perform your duties according to what you are required, and you can't do anything beyond that. I mean, I was so shocked when R.G. Mugabe, after spending 38 years in power, they gave him $460,000 and they said it was not enough. You know, those are the leaders who are supposed to say, no, give this to the people because it benefited being in power. You know, so, but at least we've got a sense of transformation. We've got at least agitators who have started now, individuals and young people, that, you know, this is enough for this. We need the countries to be moving into this direction.
And so far, do we have credible anti-corruption bodies on this continent?
Not what I'm aware of. We do not have credible, but in the rest of the world, I think we have in China, they've got a very good policies and laws regarding corruption. I think it's death penalty. Once you are found and convicted, being found of doing corrupt practices, you know, because there they're regarded as highly, you know, than the way in Africa they regard it, because they just think it's corruption is petty. But until we teach the people that corruption is beyond any criminal act somebody can commit, you know, even beyond murder, because you kill a magnitude of people. For instance, if you take the money which is meant for the hospital infrastructure, you know, then the people can't have the infrastructure. You take the money for education infrastructure, people can't get educated. You take the money for infrastructure for agriculture, people cannot feed themselves, because these individuals have they've built the houses of complexes, you know, to enjoy and benefit from those things.
Let's talk about how the process of holding a corrupt government to account is doing, as we have seen most government officials and leaders are being given immunity against facing justice.
Yeah, it's quite shocking, because I think they talk to each other as presidents. They forget about their constitutional right and say, no, please, can you help me out? We've got that. But I'm glad in South Africa the judge ruled against Grace Mugabe regarding the incident that it was wrongly for the Minister of Foreign Affairs at that time, or International Relations, to grant immunity to Grace Mugabe because she committed something. You know, that at least we've got a sense of moving forward. You know, the other problem which we have in Africa is the constitution powers, the decentralization of the arms of the government. They are compromised because the president dictates and can appoint the National Prosecuting Authority, can appoint the Chief Justice, and can appoint all these Chapter 9 institutions who's supposed to be watching and keeping an eye on the government. And those institutions becomes compromised. But we have to restructure ourselves that these Chapter 9 institutions are bodies which are manning and looking after the executive's function. you know, and they work independently with limited or no actually interference from the main national government.
And so far, how is Africa doing when we look at constitutional democracy?
Some countries have developed. I mean, South Africa is one of them. The constitution is moving forward. They've been updating it. But most of them, on average, of 54 countries, I think 70% of the 54 countries, you know, their constitution is based on a autocratic regime or one-party state where they dictate. The president is the one who runs the whole government. I mean, you'll be so shocked if you watch some of the parliament sittings in the rest of the African continent. The president is above the institution of parliament. So people, the speaker and the members of parliament feel intimidated to ask the president. So this is one of the major problems in Africa, and until we start looking at decentralizing the constitution and having a constitution which looks at the functionality of the credibility of democracy, of the policies of the government, then at least we can be moving forward. And I think South Africa has set a benchmark, you know, among other countries, you know, where democracy is coming to the people. They're recognizing the people, and I think some other countries now, they've started learning from there. There's been some intergovernmental meetings, you know, conferences. I see the Pan-African Parliament in Midrand here. They interact and see how, you know, how they can manage and sort out the rest of the African continent problems.
And what do you make of the constitutional foundation on which political rights are exercised, and how the electoral process has been used in most of the African countries?
Yeah, you see, some other countries, they haven't, they never, though they are signatories to the United Nations Bill of Rights and the rights of citizens, you know, they do not practice that. You know, that's the biggest problem. We have people being incarcerated without any reasons. You know, they can't even challenge that reason. It's almost impossible for them to sue the government on constitutional matters. But we've seen a sense of moving forward. Some other countries have adopted. Before they had only the Supreme Court as the highest court in the land, and now they have adapted the Constitutional Court in other countries, you know, to look at constitutional matters, you know, to look at the rights of citizens. Unfortunately, civil activists have been also arrested, you know, and harassed. You know, it's not a small war which, you know, Africa must fight, but you know, there's a lot of gatekeepers who are protecting because they benefit from those things. But at least there's a sense of you know, people moving from the bad to going to the good. You know, if we can only move the same pace. But the other problem is the change of governments. You know, that we do not have a constitution in Africa on average which can be protected, that whoever the president who comes there will never going to interfere. And each and every president who comes to each and every country, they come up with their ideology and they start changing things. And, you know, we need a universal constitution document which can be respected, and that each and every president who comes there, they must respect that. And, you know, and if they do not respect that, there should be consequences. You know, we've had a very bad report in Africa of presidents leaving office, and most of them, they end up passing through the courts instead of going to the retirement village or home. You know, they always goes to answer some questions there. But, you know, these are some of just the measures that we do not have repeats of corruption, you know, in two countries, individual countries.
And we have seen recently that the opposition in Zimbabwe has filed papers at the Constitutional Court. What scenarios can we see at play after this?
Yeah, but already we've been told that they are late for filing those because there are a lot of irregularities in their filing of the document. You know, the period they've given of 7 days, which includes the weekends, it's very short. It's actually not very fair to the opposition parties. They do not give an opportunity, you know. So there is very little success. The chances of succeeding or having a fair deal in Zimbabwe is very rare. Because President Emerson Mnangagwa-elect has also proceeded to carry on his national duties, ignoring what the Constitution says or whatever they say. Even if they go to the Constitution, nothing is going to come out from that. So just that arrogance and not confident into the people and just giving a chance to people to accept defeat, you know, is the biggest problem which we have in Africa. So I don't think they will succeed there. That thing has happened before the other parts of the African continent where the elections has been challenged. It's not new. The elections, sometimes they get delayed of the results and people get agitated, you know, and, you know, it's a bit of a problem. I mean, the losing of the about 4%, it's unacceptable. I mean, when we had elections some time back, you can see that this is the loss of the elections. You know, there's at least a clear margin. But when you look at some areas of voting electoral processes, you find that you know, Africa's got, actually I must share this with you, it's got a history where the total number of voters registered and the total number of voters announced, they actually do not match. For instance, registered voters is 20,000, but you hear that the total of all the candidates, they add up, they come to 50,000. So now you don't understand where those other voters are coming from, you know. So we need to clean up and make the political electoral reforms to be clear and clean so that people understand and should be able to shake hands and give each other a hug at the time of the results that you are the best. And that's what Africa is supposed to drive itself to.
And looking at some of the election results across the African continent, we've seen that most citizens are not happy with the outcome. And usually when they're not happy, they leave their country, which affects other neighboring countries as well. Looking at war-torn countries, which are not the only ones affected, but these wars affect the neighboring countries. We have the AU and SADC that take time to respond to such issues that need attention. What are they lacking when it comes to solving these issues, especially in the war-torn countries?
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, you know, the only way to change government is through the ballot box. You know, and the people understand that and they respect the rule of law and the constitution and their sovereignty of their countries. And unfortunately, the constitution or the government in place at that time cannot give them that opportunity to change the government. You know, for instance, you go to the shop, you want to buy or want to buy a car. You know, you ask for, you want a red car and they give you a white car. You know, so this is what is happening. Most of them, they say they voted for instance, in Zimbabwe, they said we voted for change. We did not just want to remove RG Mugabe, but we wanted the whole ZANU-PF to be removed so that we can usher new people inside there. And that's why the people, they don't understand. You know, the mass people, they're marching towards a reform, the transformation of their country, and it does not be given. So this is why the country resorts to, there's nothing for us, we risk our lives here, we're going to leave. But, you know, I always tell people that live in your countries, it's always not good solution. You must sit back and roll up your sleeves and make sure that you put pressure to the government, you know, and create agitators to change that transformation that the countries can be good. I mean, we've seen Europe, America, North America, Canada and the rest of the other continents which are doing very well. They fought independence, they fought civil wars, they fought, this time they are not fighting anymore because they have come to understand to themselves that what we fought for, we have achieved, now we must work. But in Africa, we are still fighting, we are still under construction because of the mindset of the people. You know, it's not decolonized, we're not fighting towards one goal as in unity. You know, it's so shocking that even opposition parties, like I was with a view in Zimbabwe of most of the people and friends I asked that they're going to vote out ZANU-PF, you know, but my surprise was the opposition parties, they had to split the votes, you know. So if you add up the all 23 or 20 votes from the opposition, if they had to vote for instance, MDC should have won the elections, but they went individually. So there's no unity in trying to achieve and sort out the African problems, you know. But my only view that Africa, we must look at solving our own problems rather than looking at international bodies.
And since you also touched on the international bodies, and here on the continent, on the African continent, we look mostly at the AU and SADC. But most people have said that when it comes to countries that are going through some kind of war, it seems as if SADC and AU is nowhere to be found, because we also know that the DRC had asked for the intervention of SADC, and it took a few weeks, because we did have them on the show, and they were saying that they are busy trying to call out to Cyril Ramaphosa to actually assist in their country. That took a while in terms of the time frame that they usually take. What do you make of that?
Reseko, SADC has got bodies, you know, within SADC which looks after governance and security, but they do not have an army. You know, SADC hasn't got a structure. If you talk about SADC, you're talking about presidents only. President Cyril Ramaphosa is the chairperson currently of SADC, but he's got only other presidents who are within the region, you know, of 15 countries. There's no divisions for the army, for instance, you know, to go and keep peace in Democratic Republic of Congo, you know. So it incapacitates the function of the organization. And the other problem is a part of their funding, and or if not so, most of their funding comes from these individual countries. So the individual country, for instance, South Africa, if it dares that it doesn't want SADC, it can cancel the relationship with the SADC. So this is how fragile SADC is. So they can only do so limited power in terms of influencing the sovereignty or the working of the individual countries. You know, I was with a view that they should be more aggressive, you know, in condemning these war crimes. I mean, I'm glad that President Joseph Kabila is stepping down, you know, but he indicated earlier that he's gonna, I was in the Democratic Republic of Congo, he indicated that he's gonna stand, but you know, the condemnation should have come 2 years earlier than what has happened now, because many people have lost their lives in this time of transition. And taking long to respond to conflicts and you know, problems like that of the individual countries also poses a problem in the credibility of the organization. But the only hope is at least we've got a body, and we shouldn't depend on the SADC. The individual countries must account for their problems, to take their governments to account. I mean, President Cyril Ramaphosa can only go there and tell them, you guys, you mustn't fight. They say, okay, we're not going to fight. But immediately he leaves that office, they will start fighting, you know, because he's got also his responsibilities in South Africa to carry out his duties. You know, these presidents must sit down with the opposition parties. We are fighting one common goal, the upliftment, the equality of the lives of our people. Let's find a solution. And that's the only way they have to do it. But they work in isolation. I mean, some of them have sat down with them. They cannot even sit like the way we're sitting and share a cup of coffee, because they're scared of poisoning each other. You know, that's how rough it is. So we must love each other and have self-esteem and sort out our problems. And I think Africa is going to move forward.
And another issue that I want us to touch on is is ethnicity. Is it the main cause of instability, civil conflict, and poverty in Africa?
Yes, ethnicity is a major problem. It's actually beyond than corruption. Ethnicity, it influences who runs the government, and some tribes or religion, you know, in Africa, they do not want other tribes. That's the biggest problem. You know, I'll give an example here in South Africa. You know, during 1990, 1994, it was very difficult for former President Nelson Mandela to unite the whole country, you know, to include the Zulus from there, because they wanted to to rule themselves. Thank God we had people like former President Dr. Kaunda, who sent a personal letter to Inkatha Freedom Party leader that you must work, please, with Nelson and try to make this transition. So if we do not sort out those ethnicity, believing in ourselves that we are citizens of one country, beyond our tribe, beyond our ethnicity, and I think there will be that unity. At the moment now, because some tribes, they think they're superior than the other ones. A few years ago, I thought racism was just between the white and the black person, but you can see racism also into these tribes where they feel the other tribe is more superior, that they should have their president, their son as a president of the country. And if somebody is there, they say they must wait. We must eat also. We must have somebody from our tribe, to be there so that we can speak in our own language. Africa has been involved with a lot of problems, especially languages.
Yeah.
I just feel so bad that Africa, we adopted these colonizers' languages like French, English. We should have had one universal language in Africa. I mean, if we learned French and Portuguese, Spanish, and and all these other languages, we should have one language we should have been speaking. And I think unity is the biggest challenge. If we do not unite and go in separate ways, and that's why the problems are escalating in Africa. Political parties are formed on the basis of ethnicity. So they know that this person controls this region, is our tribe, is our man, is our child. We want him to be president. And you find that the development into those areas is different from the rest of the other country, because the ruling government can be one ethnicity and the other opposition from that area of one of those members of parliament is a different ethnicity. So they do not give them money to develop those areas. And even if they give them the money to develop those areas, they do not use them to develop because they want the government to fail, to look that they are not doing anything. But we are learning from what is happening. A lot of people are dying and continuing fighting. We've got those champions of people agitating for change. And I think we've got young people now who are coming back on board now to realize that fighting this battleground, we're not going to go and achieve anything. And I think there's some countries, which I can mention, which are going towards unity. I mean, if you talk about Dubai was a desert that has been rebuilt, just because of unity, but they've got different languages there. If you talk about Japan was bombed in the World War, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, atomic bomb, you're aware of it, but they have built Japan, you'll be surprised when you go there. But Africa, we're still trying to struggle to come to terms to iron out these problems. But sooner or later, we'll iron out this problem and Africa will be a safe haven.
Right, Dr. Sinkala, thank you so much for joining me on this conversation. That was Dr. Sinkala, the lawyer and renowned political scientist and business entrepreneur, who is also an international political expert and president of World Native Identity Foundation. Now, as we were having a discussion on tackling the challenges of governance in Africa, we were also looking into democracy, civil wars, leaderships, as well as corruption.